Hello everyone, great many thanks for being here. I'm very happy to see you. I'm very happy that you survived the after party. I'm usually the person who delays everyone at the after party, and at the moment I'm here to welcome you in the morning. So we're going to talk about how to develop a readable and transparent and clear code at the level of a project. A couple of words about me myself. Approximately 5 years ago, I have experience in Python. Previously, I actually experimented with different languages, but I started working with Python 5 years ago when Django Channels version 1 was developed. I was one of the most active developers, and with HTTP2 I actually played around with it, and I decided then to shift to more up-to-date problems that I see in our industry. I see the following problem. Programming, generally speaking, is always very tough business, and sometimes it is dull and boring. It doesn't depend on the framework that you work with, neither it depends on the language that you use in programming, but it does not depend on the domain area. Just to narrow the scope of how we approach to this topic, I suggest we could think about a web service which is somewhat useful, and there is a button buy, and it asks for money for its service. So at some outskirts of a city, there is a young developer in a startup. He drinks smoothie and he likes micro framework because he doesn't impose any massive conventions. He doesn't require any threshold of entry, and there is long handlers and a great number of if statements, long if statements. Just a small example. It sees our button buy, and in some of the parameters there is an obscure symbol. It thinks about deleting it, and he starts actually checking all the business cases and everything it sees. But when it actually uploads to the production, you can see that there is an error and something goes wrong. When there is a long function, long handler, then it's quite difficult to understand all the business logics behind it, because there are so many things behind it, and a human eye cannot actually embrace it. At some other end of the city, there is a middle-aged person sitting, and he operates with a big framework with great number of conventions, and a lot of things happen. He develops a completely different service, but nonetheless there is also a buy button there. With such a big framework, we also have great number of problems. For instance, we need to know it very well to know it inside out. Second, when we read a code, we see some zigzags and tracebacks of the code that we developed, and in the code of the framework, which our handlers functions will actually call at a certain order. And it happens so that it calls them in a different order that we expected. So that is why there will be ears and tracebacks everywhere. And here you can see that, yes, indeed, we collected everything that is relevant to the purchase of service, but reading this code, we don't actually know what kind of business scenarios are behind it, and we don't know how to use it. And what exactly does this class do? we open bigger documents, and we spend approximately 2 hours, and we come to the conclusion that somewhere here, most probably there will be a juggling act of classics and the objects that we handed over via attributes. For example, we came to this method. For instance, there will be serializer called. We come to the serializer, and what actually is there to expect? Most probably it's a mapping of some JSON margins, and yes, indeed, it is really so. It's mapping and some other magic method which changes and amends the conditions, and it's not clear when it will be called, what is the method all about, and how to use it. All this knowledge is already lost in the head of the developer who actually introduced the method in there. But the only thing we know is that if we delete this method from here, it will go flat. So it's a real pain for us because these projects are very fragile, and every time we try to somehow amend them or update them, everything will go flat and everything will be lost. And it's really hard to understand what is it all about. We see some models, serializers, and you look at all them and you don't know whether it is a blog or sales platform. From the viewpoint of Django and Flask, it's a set of something. And as we cannot actually understand what the project is about and how to start working with it, we actually have problems with the managers who actually see that the deadlines are missed. And there is always lagging behind the schedule with the developers. And it all happens because the project is a real slam. It's usually a landfill from the framework documents. People actually developed long ago the solution to this problem. The solution is that in every program there must be parts of 4 business logics, according to which you can familiarize yourself with the project and what actually are the duties and responsibilities of it. And all the frameworks, the caching libraries, and so on and so forth, are tools and instruments upon which this business logics, or which this business logics utilizes in order to resolve these particular tasks. But the framework actually is not about the application itself. So an example of business object in Python, it can be manifested as a simple function. It is not as big as the code that I demonstrated previously. It's much more transparent and clear to us. First of all, we can trace back what is derived from where and what are the origins of different lines. If it is structured like this, then the majority of problems, in fact, are already resolved. I mean the ones that I touched upon above. But I suppose that it's not enough, and I started actually subdividing the set of libraries in order to understand the architecture, and I suppose that it will allow me to develop the something that will not make my eyes bleed. So I would like to read some DSL and read it as an English text and understand what it's going to be about. I would also like, when the business object calls my methods, I would see that what business solutions were taken, why, and why some business logics actually was missed. And I would like also to see the scope of data that my business object works with, operates with, and I would like to see why and how. For instance, there was some skipped code. Or there is a category that came to it, and it created some method of business logics. And also during tests, I would like to see pretty much the same and at the same time understand what line of the test and what business scenario can be seen for me to understand why this or that test dropped. Or just when in the process of debugging, I want to understand what is wrong, and in this business project, I want to start a handler and understand the error and have an opportunity to trace it, to understand what actually happened and where. And most important, when at 3 o'clock in the morning there is some alert that wakes me up, saying that there is something, there is a problem with production, I would like to understand what kind of actions the user did, to understand when things started going wrong and why it happened so. How to use this particular library if we want to. So first of all, we need to describe the business object, the business scenario. This is a sequence of steps that must be performed in a particular manner. These particular steps are implemented by means of methods. All the methods, they come within the above-mentioned context, the namespace object, and they bring back a certain marker according to which this business object can decide the failure results, the skipped, in order to skip a business part of the business object or bring back some of the values. The business object itself can be used as a simple function. For example, there is a place or an area where our business logics can be developed using human language, and actually understanding how and why and what for. And now the only thing that is left behind is to find the place where these business logics can be placed. I don't want actually it to be in the junk models, in the salary tasks. It's not where it is. It must be. I want the hierarchy of these layers and the way I want it to correspond to the composition of objects. So if a person has the same mindset, it can go to the dependencies library in order to introduce via DI the business object in any frameworks which the dependence only supports. For example, there is a DI container where our business object is going to be placed. What do we say? We say dependency injector. Please go to this class, put these functions, and give me my business object for me to receive it by this name, by calling this name. But, well, there is nothing extraordinary. It's just how the classics are assembled usually, but having such container, we result in a very interesting feature of framework integration. We can develop features from DI container immediately. For instance, it can be DI container to the routing Django, and when you process post-HTTP work, bring back the business object, the argument, and the HTTP call. Then there will be a call of our business logics, which is not adjusted to the transport level of Django, and which in fact is capable of doing something with this transport. And also we can develop the same salary tasks in the same style, in the same mode. Go and put my DI container to the salary application, and when the worker does the task, give me another business object, give me the arguments of the task that it received, give me the instance of this task. For example, for me to start some mechanics in salary, and here you can see that our business logic is not adjusted anyhow to any framework. It just speaks with it via an interface, and this is not direct inheritance, this is hierarchy. What are the plans for this project development? While talking backstage at several conferences with different people, different specialists, I understood that people have keen interest to the stories, opportunities of working with the context tracing, integration of entry, but not everyone wants actually to develop the business case in English. That's why there will be a low-level interface where the list of functions or arguments can be just transferred, and without DSL collect the business logic. Then async.io support is also in plan, and also to have it asynchronous, just to send it to Outlook, Loop, and also to have the support for async outlooks. Also in dependencies, the Flask support is planned, and other frameworks just to collect the views and the handlers, also in the declarative mode. Also, there are several plugins to linters, and for us at the level of code development to understand that in the DI container, in the class constructor, there will be not the type that he expects, but in the context, we also try to inbuild a type which is unexpected to the function in the next business step. So, all the parts of the codes, you can experiment with them right now. It is all released. We already have them in production. You can actually play around with them. Come to the website, come to the GitHub, come to the Twitter account of the Dry Python project. Leave your feedback. I will be very happy to receive it, and I would like to thank you for your attention. I will be happy to take your questions now. Okay, thank you very much. Let me torture you with questions. Let me grill you with questions. I suppose that it's wonderful with the stories, what to do with the stories. The dependencies is so-so. Okay, it looks like a useful thing anyway, but I would like to come to it from a different perspective. So you talk a lot about the code usability, but when you start talking about the conveniences for business, but this is business logics, I would like to somehow link it with more or less clear language with a product. And there is a cucumber. You know, there is a stories review from the automatic generation of different business scenarios in different cases. Yes, I hoped for that. That's why my question is about different things. So talking more about business cases, sometimes it happens so that business cases very much distributed in different microservices, but it's one business case, it's one story. It's actually take an order, put in the basket, do something in the microservice, and talk about it via API. There are certain tools needed that could persist the current condition of some run of a business case, and here I suppose there are plans And the first step towards this direction, the stories can be inlaid. By hierarchy, you can find them. And stories can be linked with such concepts as a chain of calls and start in the salary task. So the two stories will be linked, and in plans, for instance, if a story in the salary task drops, then there will be also showed the context of a story that scheduled it. When we speak about the microservices, then it's not very much clear how to integrate it all. There are mechanisms that will allow us to hook and to understand that there was a schedule. Yeah, that's something that we are planning to do. But maybe there will be your own persistence. Maybe yes, but we should come and see. We shall live and see. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. That's been very interesting. I would like to continue. The second question about the microservice. Such a thing that is called Saga. It's an external sort of thing that goes in one service, then another, and it deals with this distribution that the previous question dealt with. So this story is attributed to one Python process only. Well, the story is just a description. That can be a composition of stories. How do we go from one method to another? At the moment, it can be described in dependencies. You can expand the tool for the stories to be linked more evidently, and not inside the story, but in the on the upper level. One story will call upon the other, and it will call it via the microservice call or micro salary task, and between them there will be some bit of transport. But the thing that these stories are linked, it can be traced via DSL, for instance, and there are certain plans on how it is going to be done. But generally speaking, these are just plans. It's a very young project. It's younger than 1 year, so such complicated business cases, it is not capable of operating them yet. But there will be GitHubs, and later on we shall have a chance to discuss that in detail. Any more questions? Any more discussions? Thank you. So the question is, what about VDE support in terms of updates and so on? So in terms of the development of dependency, it's clear. The patchan will help you, but what about stories? What about the type description and so on? As a matter of fact, when I develop a code, the JEDI thing actually understands what kind of methods will be attached to what kind of stories. The context actually was transferred not very evidently, but by the discussion in Moscow Python, we decided that the context should be transferred by argument in actually to link to the annotation to it. So dependencies at the moment can deceive all the VDE that I know, but as it is a small just patch of wrapping, I suppose it's not that important. Thank you. I do not understand it. What is the idea of dependencies? What does it do? Why do we need dependency injector? This is optional, indeed, because as far as I see things, I don't want inheritance. I want a hierarchy of objects. And that is why actually doing this hierarchy manually every time I develop a view or something, it's not convenient. That's why dependencies is a container that can do it automatically, and it can, for instance, provide me with parts of tests. Like if you step aside from monkey patch, then you can you can replace chunks of stories. Like in the stories, it gives us a part of the story that sends SMS, and also there is a small stub that we can operate with. This is just my view. The main project is still stories, and the DI, if you want to use it, you can. If you don't, it's okay. But whether it will add more magic and whether it will make things more obscure in the end, because there is a content and you can actually stuff it with what not. Well, it's mutable, and I would like to say that the only way to expand it is when in the success you bring back some expanding scope. So via this mechanics, via this mechanical feature, the object can inbuild additional info where this patch of object comes from and where the data is derived. But the context actually is a namespace object. In your slides also you saw some object with a by method, and also there was some I parameter sent to it. What is this I? What does it stand for? This by I find category. What is this? This is DSL part, which assembles the business object plan. It's done at the story decoration stage, just to collect everything we are going to do. And when we operate with this class, it belongs to us fully, and it can be assembled and collected in any mode. This is our particular business object that can be called as method. The context is a namespace object where the business object will send some scope of variables. And this is just a description of how to develop business scenario. And this particular description is not liked by everyone, and some of the older programmers, they ask me for a list of functions that can be transferred as one chunk, one bulk. But I like to trace everything, and in our plans, we would like to make this part optional. And how do you know that this by goes to ID, price ID, and so on? Where is it written? Here you have this decorator argument, which receives a list of arguments for calling and being validated by the business object, but it's not in the slide actually. Actually, where I had some space in the slide. Can you have some if here? No, not here. And actually, you need to install here some limitation. What about conditional logics? You know, if you want some conditional logics to be here, then you develop a sub-story. And every step here from this business object, it can be either our method or it can be a separate story in itself. And if it is a separate story, if it is a check balance, and it can start a bulk of business logics, and if the incorporated story is here, then it will skip itself, and the logical transitions, they are implemented like this. So that means we just skip something, but there is no if as a classical condition, like, you know, we check our pay balance, for instance. If I have enough money, you go by this scenario, if not, by a different one. For a story, actually, there must be two stories if the balance is not enough and if the money is sufficient. Out of the microphone, must apologize. This is out of the microphone. This is out of the microphone. I cannot. So if you develop if L with this condition, you will have just one check. If you skip one and the other one is not skipped, then you check 2 times, and that's inconsistent. If you actually know how to do it better, then come to GitHub and we shall discuss it. Can you operate with ID here? And then it will, well, yes, there was a self like this, but people didn't like it because they didn't understand whether it is myself. So this one, it's going to be the self, not from the object, and we actually wanted to say here just the collector. It's an approach. If you do magic, you must do it evidently. Okay, I, a comma, price, ID. If it looks like this, then it's much easier to start a collector. You don't need to check via inspect the arguments in order to execute this. Well, things are never easy. But it's type annotation. Well, type annotation are not useful here because this category ID cannot be used here. Well, call IDE, but I have call later. But the by is already in the context, isn't it? But I will do the instance subscription and the call by there, and also transfer the parameters of this price ID there. Here we can second argument to have this type ID, and we can add that it's a runtime. Okay, listen to me. There will be a MyPy plugin developed which will prevent. So instead of developing just a price ID category, you are going to write a plugin to MyPy. Why is it better? Because here the transition to the context is not evident. Subsequently, if you have good annotation of the context, then you will have to match the fact that you bring back the argument to the success. But it's not a context, it's not attribution. Well, actually, it looks like click. Many things look like click. And if it is closer to click even than this API, then I suppose, okay, come to GitHub and discuss. Because there are arguments, there are contexts, everything. And if you have this default, show default from click, then it will be super. Yes, it will be super. Thank you. Also, I would like to discuss this example. Can we have some branches here? If the balance is not checked, no, here it's steps description. What about the parameters? In find category, and it will transfer to find price. It will send to the context and any of these methods to this category, to this price, can send to the runtime, and you can see that here we can trace the whole of the story. How to do it statically? Well, there are ideas, but they are just ideas at the moment. Can you bring back the example, please? I know how to do this. If I check balance and then you just in the stories do the it will do this branches here, but it will come here. That is why I'd like to force it. Like, you know, you develop first what you want. But here you have something like, you know, something like hangar. It's not very declarative. You want some minimal logics at least. This for, this while, they should not be added here. I quite agree that checking balance in every sub-stories is not very good. But we can make it better than just if here. I'm not sure, but okay.
Мне кажется, спасибо, во-первых, за доклад.
Thank you very much for the talk, first of all, but after I have looked at it, instead of if, I suppose I check balance or I do. Something like that.
Спасибо за доклад. Скажите,
пожалуйста,
как планируется при таком подходе реализовывать
how are you going to deal with the
хендлинг эксепшенов, логирование, все такое, то есть та функциональность, которая нужна
with the functions,
во всем
such as just the pass-through responsibility or flow-through responsibility. So if there is some exception which you didn't catch in a step, it's unexpected virtually, then the story will drop. And in the traceback there will be a context attached just to see how it was performed and how it actually failed. And also you can hook a log. For instance, all these things will be, on the one hand, a little bit aside from the runtime, but there are plans for it. And if you want to add transaction, then I start transaction. Transaction. So during, because the transaction is an implementation detail, you can decorate it either as a whole object or in the Django routing you can use atomic block decorator, which wraps the view and calls up the business object. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much.